Okay, and we're back, hour number 2. Time to spend an hour with Dr. Bill Deagle. We're going to talk about Fukushima in this hour and anything else that he wants to. But first up, heard on his program, Chris Harris, former licensed senior reactor operations and director of, he's an engineer. He knows what he's talking about. And as we've been talking about for a long time, the first apparently obvious evidence of damaged fuel assemblies in the reactor force-spent fuel pool are now being acknowledged. TEPCO has stopped English translations of the information.
It's almost, if it wasn't awful, it would be humorous.
It's incredible. They're not even clever about their obfuscation and lying anymore. All right, so we've got what we knew was there. We haven't gotten to the broken ones, the 90-degree bent ones. We haven't gotten to the pieces.
We got a banana-shaped one, apparently. One of the 88 that's already been pulled over the last one was apparently twisted, but they didn't report whether or not the fuel rod pellets fell out.
Well, I think you can count probably that they did, and they're not going to say anything.
Right.
So they're all sitting at the bottom of the pool with the rest of the broken rod pieces.
Right. It's only a matter of time. The real big issue isn't so much even pulling the fuel rods, which is bad and dangerous enough. It's what's called the steel for the entire thing. We've been talking about this for about 2 years.
Yeah.
That if the steel wears down due to proton annealing or just time, there's nothing they can do to stop it from going critical. Because the borinated rubber's gone, it's going to go hypercritical, and then at the very least you'll have a pyrophoric fire, and you could have a small nuclear explosion, which will displace whatever rod fragments up to 50, 60 miles away. So what I expect to happen out of 2014, and this is not without setting a date, is I think we're going to have massive burps. I call burps of radiation because it means it's not the end of the story. If you get one burp, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen again. Next thing is I expect, because they have a police state there now, it's because they're going to have, they're clamping down the news media because they're afraid that the run on Japanese industry and their stock market will collapse their economy, which I expect to happen next year.
Well, if half the people are dead, the economy's not going to matter much, is it?
Right, but the thing is there's a delay. People can take quite a bit of radiation exposure before they die.
Oh, it'll be time. It's a slow fuse.
It's a slow fuse, and the thing is that, most women are having pregnancies there. They're spontaneously miscarrying, so they don't have to go for an abortion, which I don't agree with. But the fact is that anybody staying in that area and trying to have children is crazy. What will probably happen is the plume of death, which is crossing the Pacific Ocean. Finally, and I saw you have it up on your site, Berkeley has actually reported that their Berkeley Council has actually reported that they're going to...
City Council, unanimously.
That they're unanimously that they're going to start calling for the state to start reporting.
They're calling for their own health department to do it. They also want the state to do it, but they are the first community in California to take the obvious action of monitoring the welfare of their own populace.
University of California, Berkeley were the first to actually report radiation levels in water and food. But when I contacted them about a year and a half ago, their senior engineer, nuclear engineer, who had just been coming back from Germany, decided they were no longer going to either test or report on...
They quit. No, they
quit.
They were told to quit, obviously.
Yeah, they were told to quit, or they would no longer have a pulse.
And
that's my guess for their tenure.
They were putting out some really good material on radiation in topsoil, pine needles, vegetables, dairy, and then they quit.
The other thing is that people don't understand is when you have a forest fire, even years later, like around the sites where they did the above-ground nuclear testing, they had a forest fire a few years ago, this is before Fukushima, down in the Arizona area, Nevada test area, and it remobilized radioisotopes from previous above-ground.
Same thing at the big fire by Los Alamos. Same thing.
So it mobilizes those toxins again, radiotoxins. So 2014, I guess we put on our Swami hats like Johnny Carson, and we're getting close to the end of 2013. Not the truth.
Wow.
2014 is supposed to be, and I don't believe in this, but I use a little for humor. The Chinese believe it's called the Year of the Horse, which just means a lot of changes are going to occur. In China, they decided that they're going to stop their one-child policy, which, of course, I don't think is going to work because the single people can't afford to have a second child, and they can't afford the incredible costs to see if their child even has a chance to reproduce, getting them an apartment and the cost of education and everything else in China. So
I know.
Yeah.
Let me go back. I want to go back to something you mentioned. It was on my calendar, too. The buildings, the reactor buildings at Daiichi are beginning to fall apart. The reactor blocks are sinking. They're saying that there are alarming cracks in the foundation. Folks, this is just the beginning of what I've been saying, what Bill's been saying for years. And the damn thing is disintegrating. It's falling apart. And there's not a damn thing. No one has been in Building 1, Building 2, or Building 3. They can't get in there. You're talking about 25 sieverts an hour outside Building 1.
They could do something. Let's use our imagination. This is Christmas. We can use our imagination. Because if people can believe in Santa Claus, they can believe there's a solution to Fukushima. Actually, the solution to Fukushima is much easier than the solution to the idea of whether there is Santa or not.
I happen to believe in Santa, but that's my business.
You can actually, maybe in a parallel dimension, there is one. But anyway, the Fukushima has a number of problems. The first problem is neutrons and water. Right? So you have to sort of frame the corollaries that you have to attack. Second is you have radiation that fries the integrated chips of robots. So you can't put a normal robot in. You have to put one on cable or radiation-resistant chips. And the only chips that are really truly radiation-resistant are the IEEE chips made by Atmel, which are military-grade hardware that are classified. They don't want the public to know that they exist. The tubes that the Russians have are somewhat radiation-resistant, but not totally. And the only company and country in the world that has truly 100% radiation-resistant chips is America, and electromagnetic proof resistance. What happens is that a lot of the technologies, I believe, is in Warehouse 13, I call it, so that if they pull this stuff out of Tier 1 Science Warehouse 13, they could assemble, cabled robots or ferromagnetic chip robots or fiber optic, remotely operated robots that could be operated by fiber optic wires, which wouldn't be affected by radiation. And they could have a processor with depleted uranium cabling, which will block gamma rays, because it's gamma rays and beta particles, which are high-speed electrons, which cause the problem. So you could invent a depleted uranium cable and put fiber optic lines down it. I mean, just use our imaginations, right? We need to be able to corium catcher underneath it. Well, tunnel underneath it. You can go down quite low. You don't have to know where the corium is. You just have to know that you go so low, it's almost certain it's going to be below where the corium is probably going to be.
Uh-huh.
And the way you do it first is you can actually run in these robots and just pull one of these bars across it, which we do when we're doing geology, and find out where the corium is with a ground-penetrating radar. Now, GPR will tell you where it is, and then you say, okay, well, we estimate where we need to build it. And what you do is you build your tunneling underneath it with depleted uranium lines, and then link them all together and create a corium catcher. You can create not an ice wall, but you actually need to create what's called an entire diversion project for the aquifer. So you create an alternate route for the water coming off the mountain that goes directly under Fukushima. And that's a major project that could take 5 years or more. But they should have started it 2 years ago. They need to stop trying to remove debris from the site, because the site is a nuclear waste hazard site. And the current technologies they're using to remove it increases the chance of either a pyrophoric fire or a nuclear explosion, or what's called a tritium-generated hydrogen fire. So when they create tritiated water with the zirconium cladding around these fuel rod assemblies, they're also generating hydrogen and tritium. And, of course, hydrogen can knock together these fuel rod assembly bundles and little pellets and create a hypercritical reaction, which is a nuclear reaction. And at the very least, you don't necessarily get an explosion. You get what's called a neutron, gamma, and beta particle flash. And you actually, if you're in a laboratory, and they had one guy back in Los Alamos back in the 50s that tapped a large ball of plutonium with a hammer, and he saw a little flash. 2 days later, of course, he was dead. But there was no explosion in the room. All he did was he saw a big flash. Of course, those gamma rays and high-speed electrons would hit his retina, stimulating the rods and cones and telling him, yes, you did get blasted. So I don't hear any of the scientists, people like Michio Kaku, who is very bright, coming out and saying, which when he does, like, making Star Wars weapons, why doesn't somebody use, like I did just now, a little imagination? Why don't we have the best and brightest of every country, China, Russia, America, everybody? Because everybody has a stake in it. Not only at Fukushima. If you actually look at the checklist of reactors that we have that are identical to Fukushima and the number of places that have...
26 here, I think.
Yeah, not just 26. We've got Deagle Canyon up Northern California, straight on 3 fault lines. We have...
That's not a Mark 1, though, is it?
I don't know which kind it is. It's not a Mark 1, but we have a number of Mark 1s here in America, but we have reactors that are also ancient design.
Yeah.
And the worst possible thing isn't just the design, it's all this radioisotopes, 50, 60 years of it sitting right on site.
I think I have an answer as to why we haven't had a single world conference of the best and brightest nuclear engineers and scientists. And I'll talk about that when we come back in just a couple minutes. Okay, back with Dr. Bill. And I finally came to the conclusion that the reason we have had no worldwide get-togethers, no global conferences of the best and the brightest, because of the nature of this calamity, is simply because there are no answers. There are no solutions that these people can come up with that are really viable, doable, in the amount of time that remains before these reactor buildings literally fall apart. Enormous amount of weight in each one of them, whether spent fuel pools, 4, 5, 6 stories off the ground. That weight can't sustain. The buildings are falling apart. So if they had a meeting, there would be names to name, people to look at, and they'd all basically have to come away with empty hands. And I don't think they want that. And I think that's probably the reason there has not been a single conference yet. There is no solution. And these people don't want to be stuck having to say that. Just a guess.
Whenever somebody says there's no solution,
now, you and I know there are some solutions. But I'm just telling you, orthodox science in a meeting like that is going to come away and probably with nothing of any substance, and they don't want that.
Yeah, for example, they may have a book IQ of 170, but they're basically their adaptation IQ, their AQ, might be only 70. So in other words, they look at this and they get boggled and think, well, my textbook doesn't tell me what I can do to get out of this mess.
Oh, exactly.
Or if I try something out of the box and it fails, my career is over, or worse.
You got it. That's my feeling anyway.
This is one of the reasons why, for example, in China with their culture, they basically build everything and can't defend anything. Because they're afraid of failure. And they basically beat it into people not to innovate. So they don't know how to either use their hands or their tools or their brains to actually have an adaptive IQ. Their adaptive IQ is basically at a moronic level. Their book IQ, to absorb and regurgitate, is very high. But that doesn't mean that their culture is going to survive, because everything's moving toward robotics, everything's moving toward printing.
Everything's going to robotics.
So the idea that you're going to move to a slave class in either China, and China's collapsing because they're now moving to a new slave class in Indonesia. Now what's happening with these reactors, this is the death of the, quote, nuclear age. The nuclear age existed in Japan for one reason only. It wasn't just to generate power. It was to make them nuclear power as a counter to Russia on that side and to China in the future. So Japan right now had a deal, and we know this from multiple sources, had a deal with Israel. And Israel was one of the prime movers getting Fukushima and these other reactors to make plutonium detonators and nuclear materials, because they're finding it increasingly difficult to get them from America. So there was only one plant actually still making plutonium detonators in the United States, and I took care of the employees, and it was the Savannah River down in South Carolina. All the other plants were closed. So it's not surprising the Israelis would, go to the Japanese and say, well, what kind of deal you can't refuse.
Well, that's why they were the directors of security at Fukushima Daiichi. They were there working hand in hand, some way or another, making detonators or weapons components. There was something else going on there. Right.
That's why that dark alliance with the Israelis. Of course, the other big story is, of course, the spread of these flu bugs. Remember, we've been monitoring H1N1, which now we've known the lethal genes are going to be in the H3N2V, but we now have a new version that's showing up in in Texas, and they've identified it. I didn't get a chance to listen to the last hour, but I've been monitoring this too, that the H1N1 virus, and most people don't realize that this isn't just going to knock off the weak and the elderly. It's going to not just hit people with pre-existing conditions. It's going to kill people that don't have pre-existing conditions, and in fact, the younger and the more vigorous your immune system, more likely you'll die of a cytokine storm. In fact, the approach by oncologists and people to try to treat you is to use treatment that is like chemotherapy to shut off your immune system so your own immune system won't kill you if you're in the end stages of one of these flus. So they put you in an artificial coma and they give you basically chemotherapy.
Right. Well, this particular H1N1 is killing people very quickly. We talked to Henry last hour about it in quite a bit of detail. I'd also like to mention, Bill, that I wonder what happened to the captain of the USS Ronald Reagan, which apparently sits in San Diego now, essentially quasi-mothballed. There's nothing going on with it. They spent a year and a half trying to decontaminate it. Apparently they didn't get it done to the point that they want to, but in the meantime, of the thousands of sailors on board that ship that were sailed right through not one but two of the most intense, deadly plumes from Fukushima Daiichi, the sailors are starting to show cancers, blindness, bleeding, all kinds of things. 70 Navy sailors from the Reagan have filed a new Fukushima lawsuit. They rode right through the plume, a couple of them. Could be thousands more who are going to get cancer and die.
Let me give you the list of things that they can do. There are concrete medical steps. First is, every one of these sailors should have their bone marrow drawn and banked. And they should have it banked because at some point their immune system may fail or they may die, start getting septic. And as the radiation starts spreading, they may need to multiply their bone marrow cells so they can have something to fall back on. The second thing is that there are nutraceuticals and technologies that can detox you from the heavy metals and radioisotopes. Chelate them out, stop the free radicals, use pulsing magnetic field therapy, infrared sauna, pulse light therapy, and so on, can help to detoxify the body. You need to identify what deficiencies are present because radiation is a major stressor, so you're going to get more deficiencies of specific vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and the disease states start to pop up because they deplete things that trigger off already weaknesses present in their genetics. If they're going to develop retinitis pigmentosa, diabetes, renal failure, it's going to bring those diseases out decades early. So you need to take a proactive stance in this rather than waiting until something happens. Just like after Nagasaki and Hiroshima, some of the smarter Japanese doctors basically would give miso soup and other types of nutraceuticals that they knew would be helpful to, quote, heal people from the inside out, even though they didn't understand the entire technology of it. Many of those people are still alive today after Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So it doesn't mean because you're exposed, if you have the capacity to generate enough healthy cells, even though other cells are dying, the balance is you can regenerate enough of your cells that your body can still exist. If you don't generate enough cells, the body starts to fall apart. Organs start to decay. You start going to heart failure. Your bone marrow starts to go. You start to getting dysmyelination of your neurons in your brain. You start to get neurons shut down. In other words, it's basically the rate of repair compared to the rate of decay. And that we have to take that approach here in North America because we are already getting dosed with radiation, and the people that drink clean filtered water take nutraceuticals to protect themselves. If there's a radiation surge, they know to stay shut indoors for a matter of 4 days to a week or more when it's bad outside,
right.
Not breathe the air. So, for example, if there was a safe room inside that aircraft carrier, or safe rooms, and the sailors could have gone in there with filtered air and taken nutraceuticals to protect themselves from radiation. Many of those people...
Right. Well, you saw... we all saw pictures of them, dozens of them on the decks with soapy, sudsy water and push brooms trying to It was ridiculous. There was no way. That whole ship was full, basically, of contaminated air.
Why did they think that soapy water...
It's ludicrous.
Yeah.
And it was sickening. And
what they need to do is spray it down with something like a zeolite, like the Russians did with Chernobyl in the area. Then they needed to suck that all contaminant up and then turn it into solid waste. It should have been done with any human beings that survived the spray.
Right. Well, they would have just flushed it overboard. But anyway, you're right. There are many more things of intelligent nature to do than we're done. I just wonder if that ship will ever be put into full service again. I wonder if it can. I wonder if it can. They basically lost the carrier. That's what happened.
Well, you know what may also happen is California may become as radioactive as the ship, and then they'll recommission it.
Hold on. Back in a minute. Okay, and welcome back. Talking to Dr. This is interesting, Bill. I just happened to get back and found a good satellite shot of the entire northern Pacific. And I used to enjoy watching the storms form off the Kamchatka Peninsula and move across one every 2-3 days sometimes throughout the winter. We've had no normal storms in October, November, or December. Now here, 3 days ago, is this first big storm of the winter, forming off Kamchatka and actually off Japan. The whole counterclockwise swirl included that whole area, which means what, ladies and gentlemen? It's picking up airborne nuclear activity. Let's just call it that. Radiation, to be short. And it's in the storm system. So here comes this big, fat storm system. And it's laid out, Bill, if you could have seen the picture, you've seen it before, from the Gulf of Alaska, touching Alaska, all the way down past Hawaii. That's how big this thing was. And it's moving across. Nice propulsion behind it, counterclockwise, circular, low pressure, pushing it across. It's moving. All of a sudden, there's this enormous high-pressure ridge about 700 miles west of San Francisco. Huge. And it ran into this. And it, just like it ran into a wall, it stopped. It began to appear to be straight up and down the map. It's like it ran into a wall. And then it began to thin out. Some of it went north up into Alaska and British Columbia. Not a bit of it went straight across from west to east, as it normally should. So when you look at the eastern Pacific, it's perfectly clear off California. Nothing. California's dry. Now, the point is, I keep watching. I just looked at it again. It's beginning to break up in pieces now. It normally would flow right across the Pacific, drench the west coast, snowpack in the Sierras and the Cascades, and move on into the Rockies and so forth and so on. It didn't do that. So what's going on here? Okay, high pressure. It happens. But not for 3 months, 2.5 months. Now, my question to you is, and I don't want to give the globalists credit for being human or compassionate, but is it possible, and they know they're measuring water, air, they're measuring everything. They know what's going on. They're not telling us. Our government knows exactly what's going on out there and here. Is it possible that enormous high pressure off California and Oregon was constructed, and they can do this with HARP, to block the incoming storms, to keep the radioactivity minimized so the populace didn't go crazy with their Geiger counters all up and down the West Coast, yelling and screaming about 200-300 CPM in the rain or in the snow? Are they blocking these storms intentionally?
I'd say it's probably a pretty good chance. But let's just do a what if. If America got acute radiation sickness, let's say we had 2 months of very high radiation from Japan, and people started to get sick. You're talking about nosebleeds, diarrhea, mental confusion, vertigo, a lot of really bad symptoms. And people started actually demanding tests like they did at the City Council of Berkeley, California. You'd see people freak out, and you'd see what I call the Armageddon scenario. If people knew that, let's say, an asteroid like Apophis, which is supposed to pass us in 2029, and has a 1 in 100 chance of an impact on Earth, that's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
They found another object that was coming, but it was going to come, let's say, January 14th. Everybody would freak out, and you'd have Armageddon parties. Well, to an extent, the Fukushima thing is like that. If you start seeing people getting very sick or their immune system getting depressed, so now you got an airborne plague, H1N1 DMP 09,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you've got 8, 7, and 9, and all of a sudden you start seeing people dropping dead on the freeway, in your department stores, bleeding from their nose at the checkout counter, because these are the kind of symptoms that are going to happen. And people expect America to go with a bang. It could go with a whimper. Now, you have to understand, why is America so important? Well, America is the enforcer. We have weapons technology and information technology that's centuries ahead of anybody else. There's 3 reasons for it. The first is we've had a free culture, so we're more inventive. The second is we've had a Fed Reserve System, and we've been creating funny money to the count of trillions of dollars to bring brainy people from all over the world to build our military industrial intelligence surveillance complex for the last 100 years. And the third reason is that we've been interacting with advanced cultures from other worlds. And because we were the first into space, we have advanced technology that's not human. Now, all of our problems already have what I call a Warehouse 13 solutions. But the globalists really don't want us in the future. They've penciled most of the population out. But they know without America, they can't enforce the cashless system. For example, the Zettabyte data center in Utah, with just that one center having 5 zettabytes of data, that's not for monitoring Americans or terrorists. That's for monitoring every individual on Earth. America is the enforcer of the biometric.
They need the thug. They need the bad guy.
They need it. We're the thug. We're the golem. We're the cybernetic Terminator monster from the 25th century that forces it on the whole world. And as much as Russia and China, Russia can quote say niet to us doing we call conventional level attack on Syria, but we have weapons way beyond conventional.
Yeah, but we don't want to show them. So
we don't want to show them. We'd rather have 100 million Americans die before we even do PDD-6.
We may have seen one of these advanced weapons when the Russians shot that incoming meteorite. And
Russia has lots of weapons too.
Yeah.
It's to our advantage to actually let Russia display some of its advanced, what I call level 9 weapons. But we got level 11 and 12. And these kinetic weapons that Russia has that can take an incoming object like a missile and knock it out. The fact is, what the globalists want to do is have America as the financial enforcer, and they want Russia, with their physicists, to be the military enforcers, and they want to create this bilateral world, and they can't let America go crazy. For example, we had a collapse of our economy because of an acute radiation sickness, or the population was, you get more than 5% of people sick just from the flu. If you had people sick from acute on chronic radiation sickness, and every so many months you had another major burst of radiation, it would really wear people down. It would change our culture. And we wouldn't be able to enforce what the globalists want on the rest of the world. So,
well, you got a point. I mean, I've been watching this North Pacific radar, and you take a look at it right now, folks. You pull up a North Pacific, from coast to coast, west coast here to the east coast of Japan, and look what you see. You'll see a stalled storm system that's beginning to break up now. Pieces of it are going up into the Gulf of Alaska, into BC, and so far the west coast, nothing. It's clear all the way out there.
Why do you think all the animals know better? They can smell these radioisotopes in the water.
That's why they've been crowding up against the west coast. They're running for their lives.
They know they're running for their lives, and they know that the coastal areas are safe.
Okay, one more thing to talk about in terms of sea life when we come back. Hang on just a minute, and we shall continue. Glad you're along tonight. Always trying to bring you the latest updates on the most important material. You can go to the Weather Channel and just pull up their North Pacific satellite picture and see how clear it is off the west coast. It was much more clear yesterday than it is now. You'll see that storm way out there. Hadn't moved. It's been dead stalled over halfway across. Remember, it picked up most of its moisture off eastern and northeastern Japan, the east side of the Kamchatka Peninsula, where most of them form, and then began moving toward the U.S. It began moving in its eastward trajectory, and it stopped. It's just like it hit a wall, and then all the energy began to drain out of it. And now you're seeing the high pressure, if you understand the directions of these things. High pressure spins clockwise. And you watch how it twists this around. Storms are anticyclonic. They're counterclockwise. You'll see where it's going. It's being pushed up into BC and to Canada, And I don't know. If they are protecting us, more power to them. We're in a drought. This is a winter drought condition now. We have had no normal rain systems moving through here. We always get them in November. Always get them in this. Nothing. Sunshine on the forecast map. Now here's the big story, Bill. Right before the break, we talked about all the animal life, from mammals to fishes and so forth, moving up against, crowding almost into the Monterey Bay, Santa Cruz areas they were seen there, and other areas as well. Why are they doing that? They can sense probably, 1 part per 10 billion in the water of something that's not supposed to be there. These
Right.
are smart animals. And they picked up the advanced radioactivity from the plume. They're also picking it up from the rain systems that drop it, and they're running for their lives. Now, here's the story I want to point out. I ran it a few days ago, in fact, on December 11th. Dead sea creatures found to be covering 98%, virtually 100% of the ocean floor, about 150 miles off the California coast. 98% of the ocean floor, 150 miles off the California coast, where they looked, was found to be covered with dead sea life. 98% dead. The normal figure is 1%. Now, maybe that's where all the salmon went. Remember, 80% of the salmon are gone.
Right.
Sardine fishermen in Alaska, no sardines, dead, gone. Herring, dying, talking about a species implosion. The sea life, remember, the last thing I want to mention, Bill, the guy who took the yacht, the sailboat, from Osaka to San Francisco has made the trip a number of times over the years. He's always been amazed at the richness and diversity of sea life all the way across the Pacific. He saw in his entire trip, I think it's 4,000 miles, 2 fish, 1 bird, and 1 whale with a tumor. That's it. And this is about 2 months ago.
Now, what does this mean now? People should start to figure out some... The Earth is a living being, okay? A lot of people say, no, it's not. And I'm not talking necessarily about the spiritual side of it, which is different, but when you have systems, living systems, and we're part of that living system, all the plants, animals, trees, even the chemobacteria at the bottom of the oceans are part of that system. When you kill the phytoplankton in the upper benthic layer, when you break the food chain, you break the ability to convert carbon dioxide back into oxygen. Now, the Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean on the planet. And it's not just the Pacific, it's connected to every other ocean. So you're going to start seeing the spread not only of pathogens, which will get their start in the Pacific Ocean, just like if you have a weakened host, it'll create the grounds, so pathogens can spread to other organisms in other oceans over time. But you're also blocking the carbon-oxygen cycle. That's very serious. It means in Sao Paulo, Brazil, if you get in some of the big areas where there's a lot of industry, you can measure the oxygen level in the day at 11% ambient, which means you're going to start seeing people act like their frontal lobes aren't functioning because they aren't. It's like somebody in shock. When your blood flow decreases, when you put people at high altitude and they're not adapted to it, by increasing what's called 2,3-DPG, it's a sugar that shifts the oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, or you're a Sherpa and you're genetically bred to be there, and you have alternative metabolic pathways, and you take glacial milk, which contains all kinds of interesting minerals, including indiamines, you're not going to tolerate that, and you're going to act like a zombie. Secondly, you're going to see people succumbing of illnesses, especially infective illnesses, like you didn't expect before. On top of that, what Fukushima's doing is it's helping, along with the geoengineering, to decrease the protection from high-energy radiation. Talking about X-rays, gamma rays, and most importantly, ultraviolet B, C, and D. And the B level of radiation has risen from 23% around 25 years ago to 70% plus. And there's new radiation bands in the C and D range. You think of B for burn, C for cancer, D for death. And beyond D, for ultraviolet radiation, you get into the higher energy levels like X-rays. So what's happening is that we are seeing the front edge of an ice age, which is going to decrease the amount of ability to convert carbon dioxide back to oxygen. We're seeing the death of the Pacific Ocean, which is going to block it's like giving yourself a very bad case of bronchitic pneumonia, and afterward you have chronic obstructive lung disease, and you need to be on oxygen. So when you see somebody housebound after they have a very bad flu, or they survive the H7N9 in Shandong, China, or someone survives a very bad flu in Texas because they get this new H1N1 flu, PDM09, there's a lot of lung tissue gone. So now they don't have the capacity to absorb that oxygen and maintain the tissues unless they receive, say, 2 liters of oxygen per minute. You may see in a not-too-distant future where people have to start having domed houses carrying oxygen tanks in their car when they drive like they do in Tokyo, where the oxygen levels drop because of the amount of business and how busy it is in those freeways. There's lower levels of oxygen present. And where you have to have actually oxygen concentrators inside your home to increase the oxygen ambient concentration so that you maintain normal health. People say, oh, that's not possible. I say, well, of course it is. They're heading to an ice age, which we are, a Maunder-type ice age. We still have a lot of industry that's generating a lot of CO2, but we don't have necessarily the capacity of the environment to turn the CO2 back into oxygen. Now, of course, CO2 drives it, so it's going to increase the plants that will tend to do that, but we've already cut down a lot of the forest, and we've killed a lot of the oceans. And we've poisoned a lot of the sea life. That's why we have 10,000 dead zones before drilling at the Macondo drill site in the Gulf of Mexico, before Fukushima. So basically, it's like George Carlin said, you know, if the Earth was a wet dog, someday it's going to get the wet dog shake us off. And,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, so, you know, there's hard science behind what I'm saying here, which is very disturbing because you don't hear the scientists connecting the dots publicly. You don't hear them raising issues and say, you know, it's almost like people are afraid for you to raise an issue that's a hard truth. They'd rather believe a precarious and preposterous lie.
Exactly.
That's
sure.
Because they're like little children. And what I do in my shows is that, you know, I'm not here to diaper you. I'm here to inform you because you out there are the solution. In your city council, like they did up in Berkeley, you need to insist in Louisiana and in St. Louis and in Vermont, your city councils need to start insisting on getting radiation testing of what's in the pine needles, what's in your water, what's in your chicken feed, what radio concentrations are occurring, and what's the curve, for example, between now and, say, 2020, what's the concentration of cesium-134, because it's going to bioaccumulate. These are not rapidly degrading radioisotopes like radioiodine, which in 1 month is pretty well gone.
Can you imagine, Bill, as Fukushima continues to emit this death, what that ocean life, what's left of it, is going to be like in terms of toxic radioactive concentration as you go up the food chain in a couple of years?
The first stage you're going to see is what I call these are, let me call these the Chernobyl stages. And if somebody's writing this down, they can get an idea. The first stage is what's called the death phase, where you basically change the environment to make it so toxic that animals that aren't adapted to it, most of them die, but a small percentage have either radiation resistance or the capacity to adapt. And you start to see the emergence of basically new creatures that have been, in a sense, they're what I call intelligent recreation, because I don't like to use the term evolution. Their intelligent recreation is pushed. So if you go back to the zone of alienation around Chernobyl, you see organisms like mice that have hind legs that look more like kangaroos, and they leap. You see beaver that sort of look like beaver, but they're not. So you see all kinds of organisms that have, if you want to call this evolution, which I don't want to call it, I'm going to call it intelligent and punctuated recreation. And what you're going to see is the recreation of new life forms in the next centuries in the Pacific Ocean that tolerate a much higher radiation. And the ocean won't die. It'll just be reborn with different types of life forms.
Yeah, they'll all glow at night.
Well, the problem is that the people that eat these also at the top of the food chain are going to get bioconcentrators. The bioconcentrators, they'll have the worst brunt of this. But a lot of the organisms themselves are, in a sense, trying to mop this up. They're literally mopping and dying and creating a radioactive layer at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, well, that's right. Now, if 98% of the sea floor is covered with dead sea life, and it's usually 1%, you got something drastically wrong, terribly wrong.
Yeah,
I just can't overestimate the trouble we're in. It's not possible.
Well, everybody knows there's a kind of a, people know intuitively, because it's hard to get people to think intuitively, because they don't think that there's higher dimensional planes, that they are anything more than a biological machine. If you actually ask people, even people of faith, whatever faith, they don't realize that they're a polydimensional being that actually has responsibility as well as abilities that they don't want to think are human. And the first and most powerful one is just your imagination. And what happens is, people, is like it says in the Bible, they love not the truth, so they're sent to lie. People believe the lie of Obama. They believe the lie that big government's good. They believe the lie that scientists are going to do scientific studies that are valid, like foolishness was put out about vitamins. Or they believe the lie that they can change the toxic level of radioisotopes, and now all of a sudden, with a wave of a magic wand, it's no longer toxic or dangerous. It's
not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And unfortunately, we have what I call a diseducation system, whether it's in the schools, the churches, and elsewhere, and in the media. It basically teaches people not to ask tough questions, not to rock the boat, and not to think out of the box. And that, by the way, is the only solution that each of us has to do. So kudos for the city council in Berkeley, but do they want to know the truth once they find it? And will they do something about it personally? Because it's going to come down to a personal level. Like, they're still going to pump toilet to tap water all over Southern California.
Well, some of the Berkeley people are listening right now, and they know. They follow the site. They listen to your program too, and they know. So there's no hiding it from the people. I think the Berkeley community is probably one of the smartest there is.
People can still keep themselves in what I call the zone of wellness, even under these circumstances, if they filter their water.
I agree.
Indoors, and do all the things necessary.
HEPA
in other words, you don't need to freak out, but you need to take action.
Got to. We'll talk more about what to do next time, Bill. Thank you very much.
And Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a wonderful time, and drive safely, stay home, don't drink too much, eat normally, and realize that next year is going to be a year of change. So enjoy the relative peace. Indeed.
I'll talk to you the day after Christmas. Merry Christmas, Bill, to you and yours.
Take care.
Okay, good night.